December 22, 1947, Krakow, Poland. The former staff of Auschwitz, the deadliest German Nazi concentration camp, hears their sentences read. After a month of gruesome testimonies, it is revealed that many SS officers were involved in the acts of inhumane torture and the mass murder of prisoners, often for pleasure, and that their cruelty went far beyond what their superiors ordered them to do. One of the perpetrators of this criminal Nazi regime is Anton Lechner. Anton Lechner was born on the 18th of November 1907 in the village of Buchers, then part of Austria-Hungary. He was 10 years old when in October 1918 the Czechoslovak National Council in Prague proclaimed the independence of Czechoslovakia. 50% of the Czechoslovak population consisted of Czechs. Germans and Slovaks accounted for 22% and 16% respectively. Anton Lechner was a Sudeten German, which was the name for ethnic Germans living in Czechoslovakia. In 1933, Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party came into power. One of the reasons was that many Germans could not concede their country's defeat in World War I, arguing that backstabbing and weakness in the rear had paralyzed and eventually caused the front to collapse. The Jews, they claimed, had done much to spread defeatism and thus destroy the German army. They interpreted the terms of the Versailles Peace Treaty and the steep compensation payments that it entailed as revenge by the victors and a glaring injustice. Hitler claimed that communists and Jews had surrendered German honor to a shameful peace. From 1933, the Nazi regime began not only to restrict the civil and human rights of the Jews, establishing the first concentration camps, but it also demanded the return of the Sudetenland to the German Reich. The Sudetenland was a border area of Czechoslovakia on which the ethnic German population of Czechoslovakia, including Anton Lechner, lived. This part of Czechoslovakia also contained the Czechoslovak army's defensive positions in the event of a war with Germany. In late summer 1938, Hitler threatened to unleash a European war unless the Sudetenland was ceded to Germany. The leaders of Britain, France, Italy, and Germany held a conference in Munich between the 29th and 30th of September 1938. In what became known as the Munich Agreement, they agreed to the German annexation of the Sudetenland in exchange for a pledge of peace from Hitler. The Czechoslovaks were not invited to the conference and felt that they had been betrayed by the British and French governments. However, many Sudeten Germans welcomed the German annexation of the Sudetenland and changed their citizenship to German. Anton Lechner was one of them. On the 15th of March 1939, less than 6 months after the annexation of the Sudetenland, Nazi Germany invaded and occupied the Czech provinces of Bohemia and Moravia in a flagrant violation of the Munich Agreement. Adolf Hitler himself arrived in Prague, and on the 16th of March 1939, by a proclamation from Prague Castle, established the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, which by contrast to the Sudetenland, consisted mostly of ethnic Czechs. The same year, Anton Lechner joined the Nazi Party and the SS. The Second World War started on the 1st of September 1939 with the invasion of Poland. The campaign in Poland ended on the 6th of October the same year with Germany and the Soviet Union dividing and annexing the whole of the country. In May 1940, around 60 kilometers west of Krakow, the Germans established Auschwitz concentration camp. The direct reason for the establishment of the camp was the fact that the mass arrest of Poles were increasing beyond the capacity of existing local prisons. The first 30 prisoners, the German criminals with green badges, arrived in Auschwitz on the 20th of May 1940 from the Sachsenhausen camp. These mandatory, colorful badges of shame, primarily triangles, were used to identify why the inmates had been placed in the camp. Green badges were set for convicted criminals who were likely of a tough temperament, suitable for capo duty. The capos were prisoners in Nazi camps who were selected by the SS to supervise the other camp inmates in exchange for better food, clothing, and housing, and they were often as brutal as their SS supervisors. The Greens, as these 30 German prisoners were called, did much to establish the sadism of early camp life, which was directed particularly at Polish inmates. The first transport of Polish male prisoners, including Catholic priests and Jews, arrived in Auschwitz on the 14th of June 1940 from Tarnów in Poland. They were given serial numbers from 31 to 758. In the beginning, as with most German concentration camps, Auschwitz served three purposes: to incarcerate real and perceived enemies of the Nazi regime, to provide a supply of forced laborers for deployment in SS-owned construction-related enterprises, and to kill small targeted groups of the population. It was only in 1942 when Auschwitz also became the largest of the extermination centers, where the final solution to the Jewish question, which referred to the Nazi plan to murder European Jews, was carried out. During the Holocaust, Auschwitz was the only location where concentration camp prisoners received tattoos. Incoming prisoners were assigned a camp serial number, which was sewn to their uniforms. However, only those prisoners selected for work were issued with serial numbers. Those prisoners sent directly to the gas chambers were not registered and received no tattoos. Anton Lechner, a coach driver by profession, had arrived in Auschwitz in 1941. It was 1 year before, in February or March 1942, that the first transports of Jewish men, women and children, sent to Auschwitz as part of the final solution, were sent straight to the gas chamber. At first, Lechner became a guard. He was known not only for being vulgar and harsh, but also for beating prisoners without any apparent reason until they were covered with blood. He enjoyed mistreating the prisoners, which he often performed under the influence of alcohol. And the more he drank, the more sadistic he became. On a few occasions, when the prisoners whom he was beating fell to the ground, he was seen jumping on them and kicking them, aiming at their kidneys. His true reign of terror began when he became deputy head of the clothes storerooms, which were storage facilities that became known as the Kanada warehouses, because the prisoners saw them as the land of plenty. The buildings were used to store the stolen belongings of deported prisoners, mostly murdered Jews. When the mass gassing of Jews began in early 1942, the Germans allowed the victims to bring up to 100 pounds or 45 kilograms of food, alcohol, household items, clothing, medication, and other valuables. While they were taken to be murdered in the gas chambers, the veteran prisoners, appointed from the registered inmates, who had been admitted to the camp earlier as slave labor, gathered their belongings in Kanada warehouses. Anton Lechner not only mistreated the prisoners working under his command, but often stole the belongings of murdered Jews. He used to sell a large quantity of stolen clothes, underwear, or footwear, and then blamed it on the prisoners, who were severely punished for these false charges. When his superiors found out that Lechner was stealing the items regarded as the property of the Reich, they transferred him to another department. As a result, until December 1944, he served as a reserve vehicle driver. Anton Lechner remained in the camp until December 1944 or January 1945, when Soviet forces approached the Auschwitz concentration camp complex and the SS began evacuating Auschwitz and its subcamps. These forced marches of concentration camp prisoners became known as the death marches. The prisoners had to march over long distances under guard and in extremely harsh conditions. When on the 27th of January 1945, the Soviet troops liberated Auschwitz, they found only 7,000 surviving prisoners. Most of them were ill and dying. In total, more than 1.1 million people died at Auschwitz, including nearly 1 million Jews. After the end of the war, Anton Lechner was finally to face justice and pay for his crimes. He was tried at the Auschwitz trial, which began in November 1947 and lasted 1 month. Unlike his colleagues, such as Maria Mandl, who used to beat the prisoners with a whip and kick them to death, he did not receive the death penalty. On the 22nd of December 1947, the Polish Supreme National Tribunal in Krakow sentenced Anton Lechner to life imprisonment. However, his life imprisonment lasted only a few years, as he was released in 1957. Lechner was 67 years old when he died as a free man on the 14th of September 1975 in Eppingen, Germany. There were no tears shed for Anton Lechner. Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Please help us to create more videos by clicking on the donation link. Thank you, and see you next time on the channel.